Good evening, everyone. I'm David Johnson of Transform Ed Consulting, and I'd like to welcome you to our live chat. All right, I've got to show this slide here. It's Transform Ed Consulting, and give kudos to my dear friend and colleague, Cassandra Williams, who is the brains behind Educational Innovation 360 Degrees. And that's a list of all the services we offer. And you can find us on LinkedIn, and you can find us on the internet. Nancy, how are you?
I'm good, David. How are you?
I'm good too. Nancy is in California. So tell us about California. How's your weather today?
Today is a perfect day. It's nice and warm. However, the last couple weeks we've had a few days of storm, and us Californians are not used to this.
Uh-huh.
So we're very happy with today's weather. It's beautiful and sunny outside.
Well, great, great. What do they call that thing? Atmospheric river? What is it called? I can't remember what it's called. The rain that you had was a result of a
Yes.
weather phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember the name. But
Yeah.
anyway, let
Yeah.
me formally introduce you. Nancy Mikhail, MS Ed, of Nancy Mikhail Educational Consulting in Anaheim, California, is an educational consultant and curriculum developer specializing in creative outputs for student success, creation and design of engaging pedagogy, and active learning projects. Ms. Mikhail's passion lies in ensuring each student is successful and engaged in learning. Her experience ranges from preschool to 12th grade. Her skills extend beyond the classroom, where she has infused her passion into after school programs, academic advising, and nonprofit organizations. She is the founder of a project based learning resource consulting firm. She is also an active participant and presenter in educational conferences and workshops. Ms. Mikhail holds a Bachelor of Arts in Liberal Studies and a multiple subject teaching credential from California State University at Long Beach, and she holds a Master of Science in Curriculum and Instruction from California State University at Fullerton. You have a lot of education.
I do. I do.
Yeah, you've done a lot, and it
Yeah.
seems like a little bit of time. How'd you
Yeah.
squeeze it all in?
Well, I didn't sleep at all, but it's always been a lifelong thing, honestly, ever since I was in second grade, I wanted to be a teacher. So any opportunity I had to teach or to work with kids or to instruct or pretend to play school, I would do it.
Well, how did you become an expert on PBL or pedagogy? How did you achieve
Yeah.
such excellence in such a little bit of time?
Yeah, when I first started teaching, my very first job was a kindergarten teacher, and I started at a small private school. And because it was a private school, I didn't really have like a curriculum plan or anything that I had to abide by. I just had to teach from the state standards. And thankfully, I had an amazing mentor who was also a parent of one of my kids in my class who was a teacher, and she taught me a lot about project-based learning and creating my own curriculum and all what and being creative and making sure that I am differentiating. So she really helped me learn those tools of good teaching and good education. And so from the very beginning, from then on, I always created my own curriculum, and I loved it. It was because I was able to tailor it to my students.
Earlier, we were speaking about the courses you might have taken as an undergraduate, and you said that you didn't learn about PBL until after you had graduated. So, would you give us a little taste, a little snippet of the types of courses you took in your undergraduate program, in your education
Yeah.
preparation program?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of theory based and history of certain pedagogies and that sort of thing, which is very important to learn. And of course, I got a lot of the practical experience through my student teaching, but I remember certain courses I took that were not necessarily part of the instruction through the credential program, but they were like outside workshops that my supervisor, when I was student teaching, would bring in for us as student teachers. And so she would bring in experts on differentiated learning, and we would learn from that. And so through the hands-on practice and through the extra like supplemental workshops that we got as students, that really helped me with piecing it all together to make sure that I can reach every single student.
Well, great, great. Well, the title of our topic, our conversation this evening is Implementing Project-Based Learning in Your Classroom. And we have 4 bullets: overview of PBL, benefits of PBL, steps to implement PBL in your classroom, examples of PBL. Nancy, where would you like to
Yeah.
start?
I think that we can talk about the overview of project-based learning.
Okay, well, let's go.
Well, the overview of like what it is, what actually project-based learning is, as you know, before we talked about before, is there's a difference between a project and a project-based learning project. And both are great ways of being hands-on. But the difference is that a project, students will research, they'll learn some information, they'll write a paper, they might create a model. Whereas a project-based learning project, students have to answer a question or solve a problem, usually a real-world problem that based on a topic, or maybe it could reach out to the community, something that they want to fix in the community or in the world, maybe. But something that they have to research and answer that question. They have to solve a problem.
Hmm. What would be an example of a type of problem students would solve?
Yeah, so one of my favorite examples, because I also create project-based learning resources, and
Hmm.
when I created this particular one, I used the standards to drive my essential question. So I created a project on weather for kindergarten through second grade,
Hmm.
and one of the standards was something along the line of students have to understand how to decrease heat in a sunlit area. So I turned that standard into the essential question. And the essential question is, what kind of structure can you build to decrease heat in a sunlit area? Again, this is for kindergarten through second. So through this, there's a lot of instruction from the teacher of like what weather is and the different types of weather. But then along with that, there are some mini activities for the students to understand and grasp the concept of weather, like maybe keeping a weather journal or some, like creating the plant life or the weather life cycle, like what it looks like and everything. So through that, they will learn about weather, and then they come to the end and they actually will build a structure, but they get to choose how to build it. They can do it through blocks or popsicle sticks or whatever they think, because really we want to promote the critical thinking of how they think it would be best to create a structure.
Well, Nancy, an example you gave, you said kindergarten through second grade. How much instruction, in particular kindergartens, how much instruction do they require? Um, Project-based learning, is it teacher centered or is it student centered,
Definitely.
particularly with the lower grades?
Yeah. Yeah, with the lower grades, I mean, they're not able to research. So the idea, like I would say third grade and up, they'll be able to research and take notes and that sort of thing with the guidance of the teacher. And I would say overall project-based learning is student-centered. But I think there is some room for teacher direction. I think there needs to be a little bit, at least maybe 10 minutes to cover some important factors, and then they go and work on the project. Just just to make sure that everyone's on the same page and fill in any gaps, because they might not be able to learn everything through that they need to about
Hmm.
that topic through what they're doing for the project. So I think it's very important for teachers to be able to teach a little bit, especially in the younger grades. They're going to have to go over things and explain things, maybe show some videos and that sort of thing.
Hmm. Could we compare, in contrast, I suppose, PBL with experiential learning? Where do they coincide? Where do they diverge?
Yeah, so can you explain exactly what you mean by experiential learning? I've heard of it
Mhm.
for sure, but I just want to make sure we're on the
Mhm.
same page.
Learning by doing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's exactly what project-based learning is. They're doing the work, they're doing the research, and they're experiencing learning instead of just being a bystander, passive learning. They're actually in the like they're the ones building the structures. They're the ones that are problem solving and collaborating. If it's a group project, they're the ones that are we're the older ones that are researching and looking, looking stuff up. So it's all doing. All of project-based learning is doing.
So you mentioned that the final outcome of their work might be some sort of structure. Who decides what the structure will be, or who decides what the final product of their work would be? Is the student making that call, or is the teacher leading it, or requiring a particular type of outcome?
Yeah, honestly, I think it could go a few different ways. So I would say in the beginning, I think teachers can kind of lead it and say, okay, by the end of this, you do need to build some kind of structure, but maybe give the students autonomy on how they build it, right?
Hmm.
So I think there could be both respects in that.
Hmm.
Maybe when teachers are comfortable and students are comfortable with project-based learning, they can choose the problem that they want to solve,
Hmm.
and they come up with the essential question. So
Hmm.
it's on both ends of the spectrum where the teacher is a little bit directing it a little bit more but giving some student autonomy, whereas on the other end students have full autonomy. They're coming up with the essential question, they're coming up with the process. So it really can go either way, and what I always say is because the idea of project-based learning can feel overwhelming. It's like a lot of steps. It's a big thing. It's not traditional teaching. To start small, start with
Okay.
what you're comfortable with as a teacher. Like if you're comfortable with doing like 3-day project, then do that. Like
Hmm.
anything, like start where you can, pick one element of project-based learning and integrate it and then build upon it.
Hmm. One of the questions I wanted to ask was how long, day wise, length wise, hour wise, duration wise, should a project be? So you
Yeah.
mentioned it could be 3 days, but how then long could it be? But then how long could it
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it could range from like 2, maybe 3 weeks
be? Hmm.
because, and then sometimes teachers are like, well, this is like a supplement to teaching,
Mm.
but it can take the place of certain subjects. If not one subject, maybe more, because there's a lot of opportunity for cross curricular instruction in there and practice. Like in every project, I incorporate writing.
Hmm.
So you could do science and writing together, and they're going to write about what they're learning in science. They're going to do informational writing. Maybe they could write a narrative about the science and make up a story, so
Hmm.
they can combine it and it will take the place of certain instruction.
Hmm.
So I would say around 2 weeks is a typical project. But
Hmm.
I said 3 days, maybe for a beginner who wants to do one element of project based learning just to try it out and then build upon it. But
Hmm.
the projects that I've created that are on my website are range from like 2 to 3 projects, 2 to 3
Okay.
weeks.
Okay. And then how do you assess it? How do you evaluate their work? Have you worked in settings where no grade was required, or if there is a grade required by the administration, by the school system, how do you assess and evaluate and grade the students' work?
That's a great question. So, at the beginning of every project, I had a rubric, and the students had the rubric too. So, they knew exactly what to expect. And so, that's how I would grade the project based on the rubric. But I would also have like my own observation form that when students were working together or working even on their own, I would write notes about it. And that was another way of me assessing them.
Hmm.
And sometimes I may have given like a small quiz or something like that just to like ensure that they're learning the information, they've retained the information, and then we'd go over it. So, the idea is I really wanted them to work on those higher level thinking skills, but I also want them to learn the information. So I
Hmm.
wanted to make sure through quizzes and observation and applying the rubric, it was kind of a combination between the three.
Okay, that's great. That is absolutely great. One of my areas of interest and one of my areas of strength would be assessment and evaluation. And I was curious as to
Yeah.
how you did that. And a rubric, of course, is a valuable instrument, and it applies in a case of experiential learning and
Hmm.
the PBL that you endorse. Great, great,
Yes.
Nancy.
Yes.
Well, another topics we have: benefits, steps to implement PBL in the classroom, examples of PBL. Where shall we go next?
Yeah. I think we could talk about the benefits before the steps because I
Okay.
do want to outline the steps
Hmm.
before our time ends, but I think
Hmm.
it'll be worthwhile to give some of the benefits.
Great.
Okay, so there are a lot of benefits of project-based learning, and I've mentioned some of them before. And so the idea is, especially in today's world, especially after COVID, there, like I think parents and educators are hyper aware of the thinking for students rather than just intake of knowledge. So we really focus on creation versus consumption. I mean, of course they want to do both, but more creation, right? We want students to be creative. We want them to think of ideas. We want them to think critically. We want them to collaborate and problem solve and do these things, think on their own, think outside of the box. So, really, project based learning allows for that, especially when they're solving a problem at the end of the project because they're coming up with it. And then when they don't, let's say they fail, let's say whatever they create doesn't work, they're they're enduring through it and fixing errors and then coming up with another solution. And that in itself teaches a lot of those like social emotional skills, those human skills that really students need for the rest of their life. So there are so many benefits. And it's at the end of the day, it is hands-on learning. And there's a statistic that says teachers who conduct hands-on learning activities on a weekly basis outperform their peers by more than 70% of a grade level in math and 40% in science. So it's just, and then I have a bunch of statistics, but I don't want to bore you with all that. But it's just statistic after statistic shows that project-based learning helps build critical thinking skills, social emotional skills, even, and it helps like both ends of the spectrum from the students that struggle to the students that need a challenge. Really, you can create one project for both and then facilitate and help within that project.
Hmm. Now, I we were speaking earlier, and you did mention critical thinking skills, and you did mention higher level. So, tell us generally where are students in Bloom's taxonomy when they're working PBL?
It will range depending on their current level. So if they are, let's say, on the lower end and they're just trying to understand and they don't have those higher level thinking skills developed quite yet, they're going to be in that like consumption phase when maybe just learn something and produce it, right? Um, they'll be there, but then the students that are on the lower, like, I guess, I mean, I saw, I've seen two versions of Bloom's taxonomy.
Yeah.
I've seen the higher level at the bottom and the higher
Uh-huh.
level at the top, so I'm not
Uh-huh.
sure which one to refer to.
Okay.
So either way, the consumption phase or the higher level thinking phase, whatever
Uh-huh.
one that you're looking at,
Uh-huh.
they'll be able to develop their critical thinking skills. They'll be able to ask questions and come up with new ideas. And
Mhm.
that's where really the 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 magic of project-based learning lies is
Uh-huh.
in that last level of Bloom's taxonomy.
Well, Nancy, we better move on. Time flies.
I know,
So
I
we have
know.
steps
Okay.
and examples. So
Okay,
please.
so steps. Yeah. So steps, like I mentioned, the idea of project-based learning can feel a little bit overwhelming to a teacher that wants to start, but I've narrowed it down to 5 steps that teachers can start with to create projects. But I will preface with saying that there are a lot of ideas online. There's already a lot of resources online, of things that are already done, or even ideas of examples of project-based learning that you can implement in your class. So I would always try to research it. But if you can't find anything and you want to learn how to actually create projects, the 5 steps that I've outlined are: first, come up with the topic. So what is the topic? What's your next unit study? What's the next lesson coming up? And then always the next step would be look at the standards, because as the example I gave earlier on weather, you can derive that essential question from the standard. And so that would be my third step, is coming up with the essential question. And that will drive the project. And then the fourth step is mini activities slash research, depending on the grade level you're doing. Maybe give an example about that. I'm kind of going fast because I know we're low on time. And then the last step is for students to answer the essential question. So they're doing, in those like 2 or 3 last steps, they're the ones that are researching, doing the mini activities, and then they answer the essential question.
I like the term essential question because, as you and I were speaking earlier, we're saying earlier, when you pursue a doctorate, when you, Nancy Mikhail, pursue your doctorate,
Yep,
you
that's
will
going to happen one day.
mhm, you will develop research questions, and
Okay.
those are the questions that you would be answering in your work, in your study, in
Yeah.
your data collection, and in your analyses
Yes.
for your doctorate. So
Yes.
research question and essential questions hand in hand.
Yep. Yeah. I
That's
mean, I
great.
got a taste of that in my master's education, but I know
Uh,
in a doctorate, it's a lot
uh,
heavier.
well, we better go to your next topic here, examples of
Yeah.
PBL.
Yeah. So I like to give examples to really just make sure that you get the whole picture. So I gave the example of weather, but just another like project example that's really fun. So I've done a project. I'll give one for upper grades, is on anatomy, health and anatomy. And basically the essential, and this is for like third and up. And basically the essential question was, how does good and bad health affect your internal body organs? So here I'm connecting nutrition and body and like anatomy. And basically, students have to research 7 different organs in the body. And there's, in all of the projects that I create, and any projects you might create as a teacher, create like a fill in the box type of thing to help students research and know what to research, because that researching in itself is a skill. So create like maybe boxes of like questions, and I like to do boxes, not lines, so that it can be open ended. Like they can write what they need. Maybe they don't want to write it in lines, they want to write it in like little bullet points or something. And so that project, they'll research the 7 organs. They'll research good nutrition and bad nutrition. They create their own meal plan, and they'll answer the question through an essay. But then they also create like a human body flap, where they'll trace themselves on butcher, or not themselves, but someone has to trace themselves on butcher paper, and then they put all of the organs on there, and then behind each organ, so it's like a flap, um, they'll write about each of the organs and how like nutrition affects that organ. And so there's just like a lot of hands-on learning, a lot of research. And so they're really doing the work, and they're the ones that are like in it, and they're writing, they're creating, and it's just like a comprehensive one. So that's like another example of what a project-based learning project could look like.
Now, earlier we were talking about the benefits of PBL. What would be the classroom management aspect of PBL?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a benefit regarding classroom management?
100%. I think that because students will be engaged and they're the ones doing the work, that I think it decreases behavior issues because, think about it. If a student is sitting there bored, listening to the teacher talk, like they're going to act out, or they might act out depending on the student. But I think there's more opportunity to act out. Whereas if they're engaged, they're doing a project, they're like being hands on, maybe they're working with peers, then there's less room for student disruption. Not saying it'll eliminate it, because I don't think that'll ever happen, but I think it'll decrease it.
What do you do for students or with students who are not so self-motivated or even self-disciplined?
Yeah. The nice thing about project-based learning is that you guide the students, but then you let them work, right? And then so now the teacher becomes a facilitator, and now the teacher can go to the students that need that extra attention, that might need that extra motivation, and
Mhm.
help them. And if there's the nice thing again about project learning is if something's just not working for the student, they're not able to do that part of the project, you can change it. Like, there are no rules really. You
Mhm.
can decrease the kind of work that they have to do, or maybe add another element that they might be more interested in, and question them, like, okay, what would work for you, and kind of get in tune with the students to see what can we do to make this work so you can actually learn the material.
Mhm.
But it just allows for more time for the teacher to work with students more on a one-on-one level.
Now, Nancy, what do you say to administrators who insist your classroom be quiet, or who have no background or knowledge, or even have negative views of PBL? What do you say to them?
That's a good question. I would tell them to look at the research, because there's so much research that backs PBL and so much benefit. I would just really go over the benefits and the research, because, and then just compare and contrast. Like, if they look at a traditional classroom, how are the students? How do they look? How are they behaving? How's the student teacher relationship in that classroom versus one that's more engaging and hands on and has a little bit of murmur, quiet murmur going on, and students are actually intrigued in their learning? I mean, I just think it's a visual thing, to be honest.
Mhm.
They could just go into two classrooms and see the difference.
Mhm. Now, you spoke about implementing PBL in the classroom. I would imagine that there's a step before your 5 steps, which is to, well, you tell me, get clearance from your administrator, from your principal.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
that
that's true.
necessary, or does
Uh,
one say, I'm going to do this and do it without conversing with a principal or an instructional coach?
uh, you know, um, I'm a rule follower, so I wouldn't do that, but I know some teachers will just do it. So I think it depends on the teacher. But
Hmm.
I would definitely talk with my principal and just explain it. And I would invite them to come see what it looks like and give them like a plan of action. Like, how is this going to work? How's this going to look in the class? So they truly understand it. They just might not know what it is or understand it, or something new, or they have to answer to the district or whatever it might be. But I think it's worthwhile to try, because it is so beneficial. And if it's not project-based learning, I mean, there are, again, incorporating elements of it or other kinds of hands-on learning. But the
Hmm.
idea is really for students to be engaged and them doing the work, student directed.
Hmm.
So,
Well, Nancy, you certainly are an expert on PBL. We've covered a lot of different things here. If you could boil it down to a simple takeaway, what would it be?
just really the idea of really good teaching, as I'm sure many of you know, is being able to connect learning to students' lives so that they can actually learn it, and within that, really help develop those like lifelong skills, because they're going to need it as adults. So
Mhm.
if we can think about that and drive and make that be the drive in our planning and our instruction, then you will have a successful classroom.
And if people want to know more, how do they contact you?
So I'm on almost all social media, but you can always email me at nancy@nancymikhail.com. You can go to my website, nancymikhail.com, and I'm Nancy Mikhail EDU on almost all social media.
Well, Nancy, I want to thank you for being our guest tonight. Nancy Mikhail, MS and Ed of Nancy Mikhail Educational Coaching in Anaheim, California. She's a consultant and she knows her stuff. Thanks for being our guest. And also thanks to our audience, and kudos to my dear friend and colleague, Cassandra Williams. She is the brains behind Educational Innovation 360 Degrees. Thank you for attending, and we'll see you next time.